Now we are having a panel with the title Expanding and Enriching Metadata Through Engagement with Communities. The panelists are Isabel Brador of the FIU Wolfsonian, Jessica BrodeFrank of the Adler Planetarium, Bree Watson of the University of British Columbia High School, Mia Rich. She is currently a digital curator at the British Library. And the panel will discuss how cultural institutions are engaging various communities to co-create academic research and object metadata in order to increase representation and access to collections, highlighting how this is done in different ways to engage specific audiences and goals. So to graduate students, assistantship, museum interactive experiences, crowdsourcing, and professional action groups. So with that in mind, you can also ask for questions comfortable for you to cover about ethics, design, interaction, crowdsourcing projects, action groups, and student-based assistantships. So I'm very happy to welcome you and to leave you to the room.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Isabel, are you able to share our slides? Just while that's happened. So we each speak for about 7 minutes and hopefully have time for discussion afterwards. And please do share questions and comments in the chat as well. We'll keep an eye on that. And thank you, Sam, for that introduction. I'm Mia Ridge. I work for the British Library. I'm a middle-aged white woman working from home in London. Today I'm thinking about how we can engage GLAMs themselves, so galleries, libraries, museums, and archives, with the process of designing projects to enrich metadata. Next slide, please. Excellent. So one of the first things I have to get out of the way is the idea that asking the public to collect and enrich records is new. The image shows James Murray, one of the early editors of the English Oxford Dictionary in the 19th century. Behind him are slips of paper that were sheets of paper sent in by the public to help them define and provide early examples of words for the dictionary. And then we've moved through the sort of folksonomy and tagging craze around Web 2.0 in the early 2000s, and an example from the Steve.Museum project thinking about workflow for tags for artworks. Finally, thinking about how machine learning and image classification computer vision methods can be used to classify and work together with the public to provide terms that are appropriate to describe works of art, in this example from Art UK. Next slide, please. So crowdsourcing enables galleries, libraries, and museums and archives to co-create metadata by contributing tags or stories. Looking at some British examples that went beyond that to really thinking about opening up collections for reinterpretation and richer records than just tags or transcriptions. In 2006, Revisiting Museum Collections was a project and a process that supported museums and archives in opening up collections for reinterpretation and capturing knowledge from community groups and external experts. The idea was to help build and share a new understanding of the multi-layered meanings and significance of objects and the records about them. They aim to capture and permanently associate this newly acquired knowledge within the documentation of the object to give it a new voice and a new perspective. So they were aiming to build in a process of community interpretation into the very fabric of the systems that recorded information about their objects. And the Museum of London's Reassessing What We Collect project, which is shown as a screenshot, aimed to engage proactively with London's diverse communities and to develop the museum's collections so that they reflected and recorded that heritage with the very specific aim of redressing underrepresentation, thinking about diverse groups along the lines of gender diversity, minority ethnic groups, faith groups, groups representing different sexual orientations and gender identities, and disability as well. So that was a real moment in the mid-2000s. Next slide, please. So we know that crowdsourcing is hugely successful. That could be whether you're defining it as the number of people reached, the number of tasks completed, or the opportunities for learning that it provides. So the screen shows some screenshots of history projects on Zooniverse, representing a range of different kinds of projects, often transcription or classification projects, working with historical records from different kinds of organizations. The number of pages transcribed on the From the Page platform, which is focused around the transcription of handwritten text, particularly using kind of collaborative transcription processes where people successively improve each other's transcription of text. So they've worked on over 1.3 million pages at this point. And finally, the screenshot shows conversations on History Hub, where volunteers share questions and share things that they've noticed, and hopefully learn through some of the conversations they're having around the process and the historical records that they're working on. So we know that crowdsourcing is really successful, but next slide, please. Where does the data that results from this actually live? The results aren't always as integrated into internal processes as you might like them to be. And you've probably guessed that this image, the farmhouse and the silo, is the result of an image search for silos in Flickr Commons, which in itself is an example of an early crowdsourced project that collected tags and stories about images and aimed to bring those back into the records of the institutions. Of course, that process of reviewing the tags and reviewing the records and reviewing the stories took a lot of work, and many institutions weren't actually able to find ways to take that data back into their collections. The results of the crowdsourcing projects might also be lost when social media platforms close, as we've seen with people using Facebook groups to collect community history. The tags or the transcriptions might be lost when systems migrate, or when the person who knows where they are leaves the institution. So collections management systems still don't really easily allow knowledge from external communities, external experts, people with lived experiences of the objects or cultural knowledge about the objects, to be recorded alongside the metadata created by catalogers and alongside research from internal people. The next slide, please. So having seen both the opportunities and the challenges of integrating crowdsourced data with our collections management systems and uniting views of objects with internal and external views, I think the challenge that we face is that the tasks that volunteers find most enjoyable don't always align with the kinds of metadata cataloging standards that we might have, where you might be applying standardized vocabularies, for example, rather than free texting. So it's a kind of classic square peg in a round hole issue. But I think more than ever before, we need to ensure that our collections have information that represents diverse views about them. They don't only have an institutional viewpoint. So my challenge is that I want to think about how we can really finally address the structural issues that create those information silos. How do we apply the co-design principles that we apply so well when we're thinking about community engagement and crowdsourcing? How do we use those principles with our colleagues so that we can think more creatively about the kinds of tasks that both engage people but also enhance and expand metadata? So that's the challenge that I want to leave you with today. Thank you.
Hello, I am Jessica BrodeFrank. I am the Digital Collections Access Manager at the Adler Planetarium. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about how the Adler has been inviting the public in and engaging in some crowdsourcing projects, both online and on site in our interactives. Can I get the next slide, please? So just to start, I'd like to kind of set the scene by providing some context for why this work is taking place at the Adler and via a particular platform. At the Adler, we have been using the Zooniverse.org platform, which is a platform for people-powered research. It's a way to connect some curious volunteers with researchers who are looking for volunteers who are interested and able to take part in public research projects. It actually began as a single astronomy project in 2007 and has since then supported hundreds of research projects and collaborated with teams all over the world, amassing a community right now of 2.3 million registered volunteers. And if all those volunteers aren't enough, the Adler Zooniverse partnership has also come to be because half of the Zooniverse team is actually embedded at the Adler Planetarium as part of our division of science engagement and visualization. In 2016, the Adler received a national leadership grant from the IMLS, which included some support for an internal project aimed at increasing access to the collections held in the Adler's collections department where I sit. The larger grant-funded project was called Transforming Libraries and Archives through Crowdsourcing, and it aimed to expand the tools and resources available on the Zooniverse platform to support galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, as well as other project teams who wanted to build crowdsourcing projects to support research in the humanities. Zooniverse was really good at science-based projects, but had not expanded very far into the humanities. So this IMLS-funded effort led to the first Adler Zooniverse collections collaboration, which we called Mapping Historic Skies. And you can see it on the right here in the interactive exhibition space at the Adler. The project ran for 15 months, and 3 of those months it was on site in our exhibition space, but the last 12 months it had to be moved completely online on zooniverse.org due to the COVID closure of the Adler. The project asked volunteers to identify individual constellations within a collection of about 4,000 constellation depictions within the Adler's collection, while attempting to expose volunteers to the way that constellations have changed and been represented across different cultures and times, while also simultaneously building a database of these individual constellations. And due to the success of this project, both from an engagement perspective, with over 7,000 volunteers participating in that time, and a metadata enhancement perspective, as we saw an accuracy rate of identification of constellations of about 98%, the Adler greenlit a secondary Zooniverse project that began this year. Can I get the next slide? So our second Zooniverse hosted project is called Tag Along with Adler, and it looks to bring volunteers into the world of cataloging. It launched this March and is a metadata tagging project that looks to bring volunteer-generated metadata tags and terms into the Adler's cataloging system to improve our searchability and findability of our collections online, but while also providing an engaging experience in which to explore with guests and volunteers the way that language underpins search functionality in their everyday life online. In part due to the success of the constellation images we used for Mapping Historic Skies, we again used the Adler's visual arts collection, which includes rare books, archival photographs, as well as many works on paper. But unlike the Mapping Historic Skies project, the Tagalong project was not designed around a single collection or a single output goal of building a database. Instead, it's around changing the way that collections are cataloged at the Adler and also really exploring this need for transparency in our decisions that affect search and discovery for our users. The Tag Along with Adler features 2 different workflows, and one of those focused on verifying tags that were created by 2 different AI models, and the other focused on just adding volunteer-generated tags. The project text that we created had to very specifically mention that there was no wrong answers in this project because this diverges quite a bit from a typical Zooniverse project that often operates under a need for consensus or a single right answer. It also clearly states that this project, unlike our previous projects, is a part of an active research into the use of crowdsourcing as a tool for actually engaging our audiences in a process. In this case, a process to tackle a semantic disconnect between how museum staff and museum users describe objects, as well as between algorithms like AI tagging models and the language used by the general public. Next slide, please. So as of last week, the Tagalong project is about 80% complete, and we are processing data sets as they are completed in chunks of 100 images. So far we've done early evaluations on approximately 600 of the 1,000 images in the project. We've had over 3,000 registered volunteers take part so far, and they've created over 200,000 tags for these images. And we're already demonstrating the semantic gap this project looked to address. A full survey of our Adler cataloging data was conducted as part of the project's development to create a baseline understanding of what kind of language the Adler actually used and was available on our online search portals. And you can see that here in the red. Our most frequent terms really were years of creation, item types, significant maker, the locations of where objects were made, And in comparison, the terms that our users have been adding, which you can see in purple on the right, have really lacked that form of specificity, but have really been geared towards describing what is visually represented in the actual images. So a further importance to this project was actually the primacy of the participation on the AI-centered workflow. Of the two, we've consistently throughout the project now seen that the AI workflow has seen an engagement 2 to 3 times that of the generalized tagging model. And many of our talk board conversations have centered around questions of why AI models aren't more accurate, why they're not better, why some of these tags don't really make sense. And you can see some of the tags here in blue in the center. And we've had opportunities to discuss the true promise and possibilities of AI and machine learning while also being able to transparently show why human-centered participation is still very much key to overcome some of those faults and lackings. We're actually currently brainstorming how to develop this project into another interactive to be placed on site when we reopen in March. But we have to rethink that approach just based on the limited capability of the Zooniverse Museum Mode tool that we had previously used to make the Mapping Historic Skies interactive. So we're also considering designing a gamified version of this tagging project to better test engagement metrics as well as kind of enticement of participation. And can I get the next slide, please, Isabel? So this project also included an optional survey, and the responses shown here only account for about 5% of our project participants, but they do help to support some additionally identified needs for the crowdsourcing projects within museums outside of just outsourcing that cataloging labor. Approximately 22 to 23% of our survey respondents have told us that they don't feel like their stories are represented in our collections or in museum exhibitions. And 13% of the respondents actually said they didn't feel like they saw anybody in Science Today who reminds them of themselves. When we combine that with extremely high markers that participants felt that museums are essential to communities and that communities are essential to museums, there's a marked opportunity for museums to leverage their place within the community to begin participatory experiences that would bring the public into the process of description, helping to increase that representation that's obviously notably lacking. There's also an opportunity for museums as a place with marked standing in the community to help foster discussions on searchability and discoverability on the internet. Our survey showed roughly 30% of our participants did not trust what they found online, but conversely, about 75% of them believed they could find things easily. And we just believe that the level of transparency in this study and in crowdsourcing projects in general, it can help have an effect on the trust of online search and really place museums in a place to have that discussion with our guests and audiences. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bray.
Hello, start my timer. There we go. Thank you everybody for joining today. Please go to the next slide. Before even beginning, I'd just like to say that I'm speaking to you from Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish, all who are traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory taken, often violently, by the so-called settler nations of Canada and the United States on Turtle Island. I am a descendant of Scots, Irish, and English settlers, and as such, am a beneficiary of colonialism and genocide. Canada and the United States continue this genocide today through pollution, criminal neglect, cultural extermination, and murder. I aim to learn to do what I am able to do on the land and the people I live and work with. And I hope you do as well and take some time to reflect on that. If you're not aware of the nations you live upon, native-land.ca is a great resource for this. Next slide, please. My name is Brian Watson. I go by Ryan Watson. You may have seen me published under that as well. I'm a PhD student at the University of British Columbia's iSchool. I focus on equitable cataloging in archives, galleries, libraries, museums, special collections, GLAMS. I have a Master's in Library Science from Indiana University, and I have an earlier history degree from Drury University. I am queer, non-binary, disabled, and a white settler. So in what follows, I'm not presuming to speak for trans or non-binary folks of color, indigenous sexualities, and so on. But I am really excited to talk and make some new connections and learn from all of you, because as someone who's trying to work in the museum world as well as the archives and the special collection world, a lot of these conversations are going on and they're happening in very similar ways and happening at the same time. And I think there could be a lot more to gather by bringing everybody to the same table. So in that spirit, and next slide, I have a question. Oh no, I think we skipped a slide. Well, the previous slide was supposed to be one is the name. There we go. Thank you. I guess my slides have not loaded all the way in there. That's fine. My question was, one is a name, and I wanted to say across the GLAMS world, there's a knowledge that we need to revise, revisit, and redescribe both our collections and the vocabulary we use to label things. But I think that we're not taking full advantage of the vocabularies available to us in the museum world and the gallery world and so on and so forth. But in doing that, we should privilege the language of the communities whose stuff we have. And to be clear, stolen stuff should be returned. But if that's not or cannot be possible, if that's not possible or it cannot be returned, we should approach the communities that we're talking to, that we're describing, and we should try to think about if these labels are the right labels for those communities and that stuff. And because my slides aren't reflective of the slides up here, the next slide really was just me saying, I'm going to talk to you about two projects today. The first is the Homosaurus, which you have a little preview of here. And the second, and that's like more actionable, usable project that you can hopefully take back to your institution. And the second is a project in development, which was the Trans Metadata Collective. The Homosaurus, which is the timeline you have up here, was originally created in the 90s by a Dutch lesbian library or archive in a Dutch lesbian, gay library. It was used as a standalone thesaurus to describe their collection, but it's kind of flat. It wasn't very well used. It's just meant to describe within their own particular collection. And over time, they started adding terms for bisexuality, intersex terms, and so on, but not in a methodological way. 2013, Jack Vanderwell, with the help of Ellen Greenblatt, transformed the original version into a linked data vocabulary, which was discovered by KJ Rawson in 2015 when he was looking for a subject vocabulary for the Homosaurus, for the Digital Transgender Archive, which is a wonderful project if you're not familiar with it. This vocabulary only existed on a few websites, lived on a laptop for a while, circulating among queer conferences. But when Digital Transgender Archive adopted it, it became a linked data vocabulary. It was placed online, and we founded an editorial board. This editorial board has been responsible for the second revision, which happened 2019, 2 years ago now. And that version really focused on changing it to a queer specific vocabulary that was meant to be used in association with another subject vocabulary, like Library of Congress headings. Recently in 2021, I think just about 3 weeks ago, we introduced the version 3, which doesn't really have any major changes, but does have new stable URIs. So that way, if language or hierarchies change, the URIs will still point to the exact same website. But next slide. This is just to say that we have been, sorry, go back. Yep, this is just to say that we have been successful across, I think more successful than we hoped to originally. The Homosaurus is used in minimum of cataloging of 7.7 million items in 33 institutions across 11 countries. In some institutions, it even replaced LCSH as the dominant cataloging and classification language. But Homosaurus alone cannot fix all of the problems associated with these policies and procedures. Next slide. And that is the job of the Trans Metadata Collective, which is a group of about 100 catalogers, librarians, activists, scholars, information and museum professionals. The work is still ongoing and open. If you are interested and involved in this community and you want to become more involved, feel free to reach out and get in touch. I don't know if the next slide will be reflective, so can we go to that one? We'll see if it's actually, I think it is. It is, great. This is the origins and the history of the Metadata Collective. Drives its work from the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia, which is a resource description framework for how you describe Black lives and people of color in cultural heritage institutions that really helps to move away from this neutral voice of traditional description and helps encourages folks to use very active voice when describing oppressive relationships. Next slide. Great. And then this is just the kind of final slide before I move on, but I just wanted to say these are the working groups that we have broken out into. Currently, our plan, the descriptive process, classification, name authorities and assets, and subject headings and authorities, as well as the ethical recommendations work group. all these working groups are working together to create several documents, which will all be combined right about December or January, December of this year, January of next year, hoping for circulation to the larger GLAMS professional in the first quarter of next year. So I hope you look out for that, and I hope to have good conversations with this. And I will hand it over to next presenter.
Thank you, Bree, Mia, and Jessica. As mentioned before, I'm Isabel Brador. I'm the Digital Asset and Collection Data Manager at the Wolfsonian FIU, and I will close out our panel by talking about the Metadata Squad, a research and student engagement initiative hosted by the Wolfsonian FIU. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'll give a little bit of context as to why the initiative was started. So the Wolfsonian FIU grew out of a private collection. We were gifted to the state of Florida by Mitchell Wolfson Jr. in the 1990s. And at the time that we were gifted over, we were actually the largest donation in this history of the state of Florida, just for context. So it was a large collection with varying levels of metadata in various states. So some of it more complete than others, lots of blank fields. And now into the 2020s, there are records that really haven't been examined or revisited since their initial introduction into our database. So one of the challenges that we were having is, how do we verify and put our best foot forward on our digital catalog and to the public for 200,000 objects? The other issue or challenge that we were having really is, we are part of Florida International University, and while that is an amazing and wonderful opportunity, we are located very far from campus. So we are actually on Miami Beach, whereas campus is about 20 miles away. So student engagement was something that we were really passionate about, especially when looking closely at the demographic of Florida International University, or FIU. So FIU is designated as an HSI, which is a Hispanic serving institution. 65% of the student population is Latinx, with 50% being Pell Grant recipients and 25% identifying as first-generation college students. So all of these demographics and numbers are really representative of some of the peoples and individuals that have been kept out traditionally out of museum professions and are inherently, discriminated against and excluded by these systems. So that is something we are really passionate about, but the distance between campus and the museum was another issue. We wanted to provide engagement opportunities that were equitable and accessible, and didn't privy students that perhaps had more resource or more access to more time. So we wanted something that was a paid opportunity to help us solve our metadata issue. And then in there comes the Metadata Squad. So the solution that we were able to work out with the help of the university is 3 graduate level history students. They're usually in the MA track in the history department, particularly looking at public history. We get 3 every year, and they do reap assistantship benefits. So what that means for all of us in the room who might not speak academic is they get a tuition waiver for a full course load. They get a stipend that is paid out bi-weekly like a salary, and importantly, they do get the opportunity to enroll in the university healthcare plan. In exchange, and to also help us with our metadata, they digitize our object files, which are hard copy and in a record room, so very difficult to access. And they also research our object collection, and we'll look a little closer at that process in just a minute. And then most importantly, and perhaps most excitingly, they participate in professional development opportunities. So what that looks like is, one is a cover letter and resume writing workshop specifically geared towards the GLAM sector. They do one-on-one interviews and get an intensive review of their cover letters and resumes. We also help apply for specific jobs. They participate in career readiness sessions, which include things such as how to network. We did recently do a workshop on how to address microaggressions in the workplace. And then we also have department talks. So students come away with a holistic understanding of what different museum departments do and how they advance a museum's mission. So what does this work look like? Right now, you're looking at a very large CSV file. This is the safe way for our students to interact with our database without worrying about accidentally deleting any information or changing information unintentionally. And you'll look at the first 7 or 8 fields that are in blue. Those are the fields that they're really working with. So they're really looking at who is the artist maker, what are the dates of that artist, the nationality, the country that this object was made in, the dates of that object when it was made, and a description. And they're really looking for answers. So you'll notice that some of these fields are empty. So those usually take priority, but then they go back and they also look at all of the fields that are filled and start verifying. So what does that look like? Oh, and before I move on, you'll notice that here on the right-hand side, there are some fields that aren't highlighted. Those are more for just the completeness of the record. Students have access to that as well. So this is to mimic the chaos that is usually on a student's screen. There are all sorts of sources and screenshots. So what they do is here in the top left, you'll see a very old looking document that's been scanned quite a few times. It's a condition report that's part of the original object file from 1989. And they'll have access to that. They scan that so that other staff also have access. And then they start doing online research. So that takes the shape of a few forms. So one is they consult sources that we all know, like Library of Congress, Google Books, the Getty Union List of Artist Names. They also reach out to different professionals at various museums around the country and across the globe. So they do get that networking experience. They get the fear of cold emailing kind of out of their system as well, which is something I think we all could benefit from and need practice with. And what's really interesting is they save all of these screenshots, which is how I had access to them. And they're put together in a digital object file that is then kept in perpetuity for other researchers to then build off of their work. And they get credit for all of their work too. They have a research log and a text document that's also accessed in an evergreen format. So a quick example are these 3 figurines that were in our collection. They were researched by a student. In our collection, we had them as being created by an artist named Adler Eckhart. So through research, we were able to actually unearth a really interesting story. Turns out that Adler Eckhart was originally Edith Eckhart. She was part of the WPA program in Ohio, so the Federal Arts Project in Ohio specifically. And what was really interesting is when Edith, now Adler, started her career, it was really interesting because she consistently kept losing in art competitions. And she was losing to male colleagues who really didn't have the same technical expertise or the same artistic skill. So she decided she was going to change her name on the applications, and she went in as Edris, which she deemed as being more of a gender neutral name. And she immediately started winning, which was fascinating. Because these were judged just based on applications. So it's a fascinating little story of how this work does make a difference. So all of the work that's done is immediately sent to our curatorial department for verification and for just review, uploaded to our database, and then pushed out to our digital catalog. So very quickly, just to close out before we get to the Q&A, some of our outcomes, and pardon the different colors in my bullet points, they're all supposed to be hot pink. This is the 6th year of the program. We have digitized and researched about 6,500 objects, and that's over the course of 18 different graduate assistantships. Post-program, there's a 100% employment rate, and that breaks down to about 80% in the GLAM sector, and we have a 100% graduation rate from respective programs. So I'm really excited. We're going to be expanding this program. So we're hoping to move beyond just the history department as a unit and engaging others on campus and maybe even beyond the humanities. And I'll now turn it back to Sam and to the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've seen a lot of discussion on the chat I was contributing to, but I didn't finish yet. So there are questions there that we could start from, like IP and other issues. If someone has direct questions, we could start with a direct voice question. Otherwise, I have some questions to put. So is there anyone who wants to put a question, or? I don't see rising hands. I start. This topic is, for me professionally, is usually valuable and really interesting. Also because it now it's more than in the past, has to do with our knowledge and our history. One point is the fact that artificial intelligence nowadays, you have not mentioned it with machine learning, and Jessica has made also a very nice representation of it in the slide. what is your perspective, your point of vision about the fact that there are human biases when annotating? So it's one side is when you have the persons that are annotating that are general public. So there are biases that we have because we have prejudices in general, cultural, ethnicity, religion, and whatever. And on the other side, artificial intelligence is biased itself because it's developed by humans. So it is a hidden bias inside of artificial intelligence. While on the third position, the first, the very traditional scientific annotations, even there is more hidden, but even there are some kind of biases. So how do you face this topic with your activities?
I think just to get just to get it started, anything that we say is a product of our times. So we can't escape bias. We can just acknowledge it, and we can step away from claims to objectivity. And I think people are doing work now to acknowledge the subjectivity of the terms that they're getting. I think things like computer vision methods based on machine learning or AI at least have the advantage of applying classifications that you can see so you can review them. But I think people fell into a trap of imagining they didn't have to review them, that the computer was going to get it right. And that's just so not the case. But that at the same time means that you can't just apply a machine learning tool and get computer tags for all your images and your job is done. It actually means it's almost as much work to use those computer tools or machine learning tools, at least for setting like levels of confidence with some of the tags that they might apply, and having to like actively maintain things like stop word lists so that there's just some words it can never ever apply to images. But it means that it takes away that sense of like, just press a button and it's all done. But I'm sure Jessica's got a lot more to say in that.
Yeah, and also before Jessica, and also take into account that the point would be also, does this mean that you have continued to renew the metadata annotations? Because as soon as we find that as it appears, you have to refresh it with our age. So you said, as Mia said, there's our age that influences what we write. So also this aspect might be, and it is not taken because we don't refresh so much often the metadata annotations of our collections. Sorry, Jessica.
No, that actually ties nicely in. Kind of following what Mia said, I think that's the important piece. To just first and foremost notate, we've moved a decent amount in the field to recognizing like museums are not neutral. And it is not, no matter what we're doing in the museum world, whether we're cataloging or we're using an AI to catalog, it's not neutral, no matter what we say. So I think that's first and foremost important. And that's actually part of what we're working at the Adler, to push some of these projects into an engagement space and into having some learning objectives. So our tag along project specifically features 2 different AI models we did not build because we were very transparent in our project to say we don't have enough of a collection to even build a model that would operate functionally and be able to recognize our collection is very small. We only have about 3,000 objects and we can't train a model to really notice anything. So we've used the model. One of them is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And obviously the Adler's collection is very different. So when we ran our images through there, we're going to get some wonky classifications because it's not ours, but it at least shows some of what a museum built. And the other one we used was the Google Vision, Cloud Vision. And that partially underpins a lot of the searches that our users would be doing throughout, their daily life on Google. And so that gives a little bit more. But again, there's already some great ways to engage with our volunteers in that discussion then, because they're starting to see some of the bias that these models were trained with, where we'll have 2 pictures of scientists in our archives wearing white lab coats because it was the 1960s and that's how we made them look professional at the Adler. And the ones of men are tagged with doctor, scientist, and the ones for women are tagged nurses. And they did the same job. And so it's to have that discussion of who trained these models and what were the images available to them, and what were they using to make these kind of classifications. And to make that clear, to Mia's point, there's a great promise to AI and machine learning, and certain things it's really good at, but other things it has some struggles with. So when you don't have a collection that is, none of us have a collection that represents everything in the world. So our models are never going to be perfect. And I think that's the piece we really see great engagement with, and especially with our AI. The public is just as interested in AI as we are, and they hear a lot of really kind of fascinating promises of what's coming up. And I think it gets to be a nice discussion point. And then that also plays into our continuation of running this project, is making it clear with the public that terms that were used to catalog 50 years ago are not terms we want to use today. And we've had to have that discussion of why some of our cataloging records include terms like, we are not going to describe people as Negro or Oriental anymore, but that is in the old records. So it needs to be discussed, and they need to be enriched and, really fixed up for modern language. And we can acknowledge that in 50 years, it's probably still going to need to be. So creating it into an engaging experience that kind of lets our guests on site as well as online users just kind of continually add to the narratives we have has seemed to kind of be we're hoping our response to those kind of questions.
That's right. One question also for Brian and then for Isabel is sorry, can your experience and what you have explored be used as monitoring instrument, or some aspect that you can use inside this experience so that it detects the gender issues that has to do with metadata annotations and data flow?
Interesting question, and I think it reflects maybe some of the differences between the fields. Maybe perhaps linked data could be used in a manner to detect, but as like most of the vocabulary are open linked data, they purposely don't have any like sort of tracking or like tracking stuff built into that. And I think just building off like one of the questions here in the chat too, and I can't speak obviously to the museum context, but one of the things is a lot of institutions are finding that these problems are way too big for them to tackle themselves, which they are. They're societal problems. They're like we all bear responsibility for them, so we're all responsible for fixing them. And some of these terms like they like if something is metadata, if this is wrong, that has been used in court battles to decide whether or not an indigenous nation gets land back from the Canadian or the American government. And certain terminology for queer folks especially there's a direct line between the harm caused to a queer person by a description term in the library or archive or museum. For a long time in the asexual community, the only term in LCSH or Library of Congress subject headings was asexual plant reproduction. So that's led to a very long-running bitter joke in that community about being a house plant because of that. So you can see these really direct lines between like what we think is like neutral terminology and like the harm it has in people's lives.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Isabel, what about your next steps from the actions? I know that we have short time probably, but so what is your point there?
Thank you, Sam. So one of the things that we're doing is we're currently looking for grant funding to branch out to other units. So particularly, we're interested in partnering with, on the STEM side, the GIS, so a Geographical Information Sciences team, but also other humanities-based units. So we're particularly interested in working with the Gender and Women's Studies Department here on campus, as well as the African Diaspora Studies, the Latin American and Caribbean Center that's here as well, just to make sure that we're getting a variety of perspectives on our collection. And I think this kind of feeds into one of the questions in the chat about curatorial authority and how that works in a museum context. And one of the ways that we've really started kind of chipping away at that hierarchical nature that happens in museums is really inviting curators to work alongside with us. We have a curatorial liaison that meets with our students once a week. And then we really start establishing the students as authorities on research. So whenever a student, or rather a curator has a question about research or a research assignment, we chat with our students and kind of have like a rolling pool of like who would like to take this. And by the end of the semester, or by the end of the year, really, curators do come to see or are beginning to see our students as experts in their own right and colleagues that they can reach out to. So I hope that answers 2 questions at once.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Are there questions others want to enter in the discussion? Okay, that's great. I really appreciated your presentation. Really, really interesting and really up to date. It is the topic that is very hot, and so good job and really enjoy it. So if there is nothing else, I think that we have finished. Okay, Mia, I leave you that link that is, I think it's really, really on the topic that you are working on. So goodbye.